So my name is Amir. I'm also an SA, Solutions Architect here at Google, and I will be your operator for the rest of the 10 minutes or so that we have. Let's all put on our operators' hats, and let's assume that our developer just walked up to us and said, hey, I have this new Go app I'd like to deploy. Hi, Miles, how are you? Awesome. And then so what do we do? So like any other platform as a service, we'd start with the CLI, which is what you see up here. We have this handy dandy CLI tool that we are going to use to add a new application called Hello KubeCon 1 into our CICD platform. Maybe. All right, let me just make sure I'm in the right folder. Huh? Back out. Is that good? No, one more. One more. All right. CLI is a good way of adding an application. It's nice and consistent. Everybody gets to do it the same way. You don't make any kind of human mistakes. But in this particular case, we're using Anthos Platform CLI. The name of our application is just going to be Hello KubeCon 2019. We give it our CICD's host name, which in this case is GitLab, the password, and then the template, right? So again, template gives you kind of that boilerplate code kind of already made up, right? So what's happening in the background, I'll just quickly explain, is in GitLab, it's creating a group, and a group is nothing more than just a collection of repositories, just like an organization in GitHub. And in this case, it's creating those two repositories. One is your application code repositories. That's what you hand off to your developers. That's where they iterate on their applications. And then the other one is your operators repository or your environment repositories. That's where all of the Kubernetes resource manifests reside for all environments, so for dev, stage, and prod. Keeping those two separate kind of keeps the CI of the developer separated from the CD of the operator. It's a nice way to do that. Another thing that Vic mentioned is that every application gets deployed in its own namespace on every single cluster. And as part of that namespace, a GitLab runner, which is just a deployment, is deployed inside of that namespace. Now there's a couple of schools of thought here. One is, how do we push these manifests down to the clusters? So there's two ways to do that. We can either give kind of the credentials to the Git repos and every single Git repo for every single Kubernetes cluster, and we push those configs down so the credentials kind of remain outside of it. Or in this case, we are giving those credentials as a service account to the GitLab runner and then giving the GitLab runner the Git credentials so it can pull those manifests. In order to do that, we have to give this GitLab runner access to pull those images, right? So I'm going to click on this link, and I'm just going to create some credentials. So this is very similar to just creating a Docker login. And in this case, the only thing it really needs is read access to the registry so it can pull the images. So I'll create a user called GitReader. It doesn't matter what we call it. We'll give it read registry access. I'll create the deploy token, and it'll give me this username and password. We'll copy this password, go back to our command line, give it the username, which is GitReader, copy the password, and let it kind of finish the bootstrap. So let's take a look at what it actually got created in GitLab. So I'm going to go into GitLab, go to groups, and go to your groups so we can see all of them. So the first thing you notice is that we have this new group created called Hello KubeCon 2019. If we go into that group, we have the two repositories. The bottom one is your application repository. That's the one for your developers. The top one is your env or your environment repository. That's the one for your resource manifests for Kubernetes. We'll inspect those here shortly. I'm going to go back into the groups, and I'm going to look at this group called Platform Admins. And this is an operators group. There's quite a few repositories kind of in here, right? So I'll highlight a few of them. The first one are these templated repositories. So the Golang template and the Golang template env. Again, like I said, it kind of gives our developers a boilerplate of a starting point of something they can code, so you don't have to do this every single time. So you can have other templates for Java, Ruby, Go, and what have you. We heard about Anthos config management this morning, and this is the platform that sets up kind of the foundation, the namespaces, the registries, and stuff like that. Inside of this repository, this is, by the way, what the folder structure looks like. There's a namespace folder. So we go into the namespaces folder and the managed apps folder. You can see that we now have, as part of that bootstrap that we did with the CLI command, we have a Hello KubeCon 2019 folder. We'll go into that folder, and you'll notice that, like I said, it creates the namespace for that application. It creates that registry secret. That's that Docker login that we just created. And it feeds that to all of the GitLab runners in each namespace for each cluster. So you see the 3 runners, 2 for the production clusters, prod central, prod east, and the staging. So now each cluster has pull permissions to pull images from that registry. And if we want to look at what that looks like inside of the cluster, so again, I'm in the Cloud Console. We're looking at the Kubernetes Engine workloads page, and I've already put a filter for that namespace on there. And if we hit refresh, you'll notice that we have the 3 GitLab runners. We also have something else deployed, and we'll talk about that shortly. But I really want you to focus on the 3 runners that are scoped to that namespace, so they're running within that Hello KubeCon 2019 namespace in each of the clusters, the 2 production clusters and the 1 staging cluster. And their permissions are scoped within that namespace. They can't put anything outside of that. So let's go back to our platform admins group. Another thing I wanted to show you was the shared CICD repository. So this is where all of the CICD for every single language will sit here. So in the CI folder, for example, you'll have all of the manifests for different CI files. So we have one for Go here as an example, and you can see it's fairly simple. It's doing a unit test with just go get, go test, and then just a build stage, right? Again, this could be as deep as you'd like it to be. And then the last thing I want to mention here are customize bases. These are the shared customized bases like Vic talked about for every language. We have a folder. So we can go into the Golang folder, and in this demo, we're just doing a deployment and a service, but you can have other Kubernetes manifests, and they don't look scary at all. They look just like a vanilla Kubernetes deployment, and things like we can change our environment, so which environment they're going into, dev, stage, or prod. We can change the image name, because majority of the time, you're not changing the entire YAML, you're just changing a few things, and that's where that patch kind of comes in. And to show you that, now let's go ahead and inspect our actual application group. So I'm going to go back into Hello KubeCon 2019 group, and we're going to start with the application repo. So again, this is the boilerplate. This is the repository that gets handed over to the developers. And you can see the first thing, we just gave them some boilerplate code. This is just a simple Hello World app that the developers can start iterating upon. In the same repositories, we have the Docker files. So this is what builds the artifacts. We have scaffolds, so they can start doing some development, some local dev testing before they even push this to this particular repo. We have this GitLab CI, which is their CICD file for this particular repo. This pipeline gets kicked off anytime somebody makes a commit to the master branch of this application repo. And I already showed you the test and build, and Steve's going to show you kind of how the deployment piece works. What's interesting about this is, as part of the application repo, we also have the Kubernetes manifest. So the developers not only get to see what actually gets deployed, they also have influence over how it does it, right? So inside of that Kate's folder, we have the 3 folders for the 3 environments. So for example, if we go to the staging folder, first thing is that it's pulling that shared customized bases from that repo that I showed you earlier. So as an operator, I can go and make a change to that shared base one time. If let's say I want to change the logging level, or if I want to add resource limits or something, I'll just change it one time, and in the next rollout, this will get applied across the board. And then here's the patch, the deployment patch that is being applied for this particular thing. And if we just look at that very, very quickly, all we're doing here is giving it the environment variable and then giving it the name of the image, which Steve will show you shortly. So as a developer, I can actually go in and I can change this patch to, let's say if I want more CPU or something, or if I want to change the image, if I want to push a different image to staging, I can do that here. So I still have that control over staging. So now, I mentioned that every time a commit is made to the master branch, a pipeline is kicked off. So here on the left-hand side, I'm going to go to CICD pipelines. And you can see that one pipeline, because of the initial bootstrapping, was kicked off. And let's click on that pipeline. And it's just a simple 4-stage CI/CD step. Again, this could be as complex as you'd like. The first 2 are pretty self-explanatory, and I already kind of showed you those. This is the unit test that happened, and then the building of that image. Once that image is built in the registry, somehow we need to deploy that. And for that, I'm going to hand it off to Steve, and he's going to talk more about how that gets deployed.
Thank you, Amir.
Sure.
You all right? Yeah? All right, cool. I'm Steve McGee. I'm a former SRE, so I get the honor/duty of pushing this thing into production. So, praise. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, it's still part of the CI step, but it's kind of the beginning of CD, which is hydrating these manifests. So these are these YAML files that we talked about before. So before we had like the base image and the patches, and you kind of think about variables and templates. This is all of it expanded out. So we have 2 files. One's going to be customize staging, the other one's customize prod. And that way, if we have any trouble down the line, we know exactly what got pushed to production. The first step is just to build those. We can click through here and we can show you, it builds them all. It's very simple. It builds one right here. It runs a customize command for customize staging, and then it does it again for production. So after that, we have these 2 files. What do we do with them? We just push them over to another repo, right? So now we're moving from the code repo to the environment repo. I won't really show you this because it's just like copy. It's not very interesting. So let's back out into the group, and we're going to show you the env repo, the environment repo, and we'll show you where those files kind of end up. So I go here. Oh my gosh, where are the files? Well, we forgot. We actually pushed it to a branch, right? We pushed it to the staging branch. So as soon as we move over there, here we go. We've got our 2 files. So we can look at one. Let's look at staging. And it shouldn't be scary in any way. It's pretty basic, right? So we have our environment label, staging, just like we expect. It has the name, hello KubeCon. So all those things that looked all vanilla before have all been filled in with the right stuff. Okay, so we saw before that there were 3 runners running in Kubernetes, and there was also a job running. There was the actual staging app, right? So this is this guy right here. It already got out there. How the heck did that happen? And the reason why that happened is because when we made the first commit, we pushed this file all the way to the environment branch, into the staging branch, and our friend, the pipeline, ran again. So let's see this new pipeline that ran. This is a different pipeline. This one, just did one thing. It deployed to staging. So we can click in here. We can see there's this job that ran, this binary that runs. We're using something called GKE deploy, and think of it just as like kube control apply, except it does a couple other little fancy things, and it waits for it to succeed, and then once it does, it sort of tells you, here, go look at your job. It's running. It's great. So we can see, yes, indeed, it's running. So at this point, the developer says, great, my job is what I expected. The feature is doing the featuring. Let's push it to prod. And then the SRE shows up and goes like, you got it. Let's do it. The schedule is correct. We're ready to go. And then if you recall from the kind of interesting flow chart, the way we do this is we're going to do it by promoting the environment YAML from the staging branch to the master branch. We do that in GitLab using what's called a merge request, which you probably already know. We're going to make a new merge request. We're going to give it a very, very descriptive name, like go. Oh no, the computer stopped computering. Okay, prod. Okay, so we're going to go to prod. So we want to make sure we're actually going from staging to master. That looks pretty good. We're going to submit a merge request. Some other person might come in, like you might want to have another set of eyes go, yeah, this looks fine. They might come in and say, well, let's take a look at the changes, make sure they're exactly what we expect. You might also have other things in your pipeline, like to make sure that we have the right amount of resources in place, et cetera. This is really boring because it's just like a blank entry. But let's say it looks good. We're going to merge it. Let's go. So now what happens in this process? Yet another pipeline happens. Of course it does. That's how this works. In this case, there's one step for each cluster, so for each production cluster, and it's exactly the same as the staging one, except this time it's pushing to production. So we have 2 clusters here. One is just in central 1, look, it already finished, and the next one's gonna be in east 1. You might have another step in here that's like wait, or check the canary, or something, but we just did something very simple. So let's take a look at Kubernetes and make sure it's working. It should be ready. Oh, it's working. So we have one running in Central 1, and then the US East one is coming up as well. So let's take a look at the logs viewer, and we're going to see if it is really running. So for each cluster, we should be able to see the health checks come by. And ideally, what we're going to see is 3 sets of apps all running, kind of, skewed from each other. Stream. This is it, guys. This is going to be it. And this is where we pray to Kelsey. So we have health checks in staging, we have it in prod, we have it in prod central, and eventually we'll have ones from prod east as well. But that's it. Our code is deployed. It's in many places. Another thing to point out, prod east and prod central could be 2 different types of Kubernetes on 2 different platforms. This is the amazing thing about Anthos. It doesn't care. It's just Kubernetes. So.